Well, this is where I now have to say I am a lawyer, but I'm not either of your lawyers. I'm not any of the listeners' lawyers. So
Not
I don't
yet.
represent any of the parties.
I might have to get you on retainer. It's time.
Well, that's exactly what I'm thinking.
Ian, David, and Quinn started out to make a $50 million movie based on Ian's book, TJ's War. Mark, Sia, and Sincera soon jumped on board, and then Mr. Z joined the team, a mysterious executive producer who said, "Stop, this is no movie. This is a 2-season, 20-episode TV show. So follow us, join us as we create TJ's War, the $50 million TV series."
Welcome back, folks, we're making a $500 million TV series. This, it started out as just a tiny little $50 million movie project. 50 million. What were we thinking, Ian? 50 million's nothing. But, these are the learning curves. We have since bumped up the budget and the ambitions. $500 million, 2-season Netflix or Paramount or Amazon Studios production about TJ's War, I was going to say 500-page novel. It feels like a 500-page novel, but it's 500 pages of delight. It's a 400-pound novel, primarily set during World War II, based on the extraordinary real life of TJ McClane. We've been in touch with directors, producers, screenwriters, actors, CGI guys, all those involved in the process of the movie making or TV streaming business. And while I can't reveal all of the behind-the-scenes workings going on at the moment, I will simply say that the pieces are being put in place. The chaos of trying to put together all of the necessary elements to create such a grand-scale project like this are indeed manifesting. It's happening. And you know what that means? It means it's time to get the lawyers involved. Our guest today is highly regarded.
I think you left out an adjective there, Mark. But.
Well, it's implied, or people can fill in their own adjective for that one. As a former practicing attorney, I'm well aware of lots of adjectives that have been thrown my way. Our guest for this episode is a highly regarded, well-respected name in entertainment law, Gordon Firemark. Known widely as the podcast lawyer, Gordon has over 3 years. Gordon has over 3 decades, about 30 years of experience helping filmmakers.
He's only 23, but he's been on drugs for a long time.
It'll do it to you. He's been helping filmmakers, playwrights, podcasters, and media creators navigate the complex intersection of law, creativity, and business. He's not just a lawyer, he's also a theater producer, a teacher, and the host of the Entertainment Law Update podcast. Gordon is the guy professionals turn to when they need to protect their work, structure smart deals, and avoid costly legal pitfalls. He's the author of the podcast, blog, and New Media Producers Legal Survival Guide, and teaches intellectual property and media law with a focus on the entertainment industry. Today, he's here to help us and you, the listener. You might be out there wanting to make a movie too. He's here to help us understand what legal protections we need as we move from novel to screenplay to production, especially when crossing borders, building a team, and documenting our process through this very podcast. So with that, Gordon Firemark, welcome to the show.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for having me. And why don't we just cut loose and make it 5 billion?
Well, why not? I mean, let's break some records here. We're
2-season, $5 billion television. That would be something. Anyway,
but you see, the thing is, I think if we get refused by the first company we go to, the price goes up.
How do you figure that?
Maybe we'll get the
thinking
5
like
billion
an auctioneer or something.
Yeah. Okay.
You had your chance,
right?
Well, Gordon, you've described yourself as someone who brings together the creative, business, and financial elements of a production. From a legal standpoint, what's the very first thing an author or creator should do when trying to move from novel into a film?
Well, that's a pretty wide open kind of a question.
I like to start that way.
Yeah, it sort of depends on, is this author creator planning to produce the thing themselves, or are they planning to sell or farm it off to someone else to handle. And the latter is the more common approach. Typically, writers don't produce their own work as films and television programs. But when anybody comes into the equation who is going to be making a media production, the first step usually is to acquire the rights, the chain of title, the beginning of that chain of title. Just to document that you actually own what you plan to do. Excuse me, that you own the right to adapt the material and so on. So if you are the author also producing, you can sort of, I wouldn't say bypass that step, but you want to document the fact of the ownership, how it came to be, with some evidence of the copyright creation date. And if you're in the States, the registration of that copyright is sort of the anchor point of the chain of title. And then everything that follows that should be linked to that chain of title. Another really important early stage step is forming some kind of a business entity as a container for the project, a corporation, a limited liability company, something like that. And in our industry, we usually talk about single purpose entities. So there may be a production company, the studio essentially, or the producing entity, but there also ought to be a container separately for just this project. And it would be the next link in that chain of title would be the acquisition by the production by that single purpose entity of those rights. And then it can go out, raise the financing, hire the personnel, and all of the other things that need to happen in order for the project to move forward.
Okay. Yeah. You actually have touched on several topics that I want to discuss. I want to leap ahead to one of them.
Can I dig into what you just said first?
Please, you are the creator of this work. You should. Yeah.
It's moving out. So I may have written the book, but we now have an entity that's much bigger than just me by a long way.
We're gonna talk about that too as well, by the way.
We've created a company exactly along the lines you've just described, Gordon. But it's based in the UK.
Yeah.
So what do we need to do to make it international? Or do we need to do anything to make it international? Because it's based in the UK, is that enough?
I don't think there's anything specific that needs to be done to, quote, make it international. Companies that are based in one country often do business in other nations. And of course, you have some compliance issues and make sure you're abiding by the laws in those various countries. Now, if you were raising financing from investors from other parts of the world, that's where I would expect there would be a fair bit of regulation with which to comply. But you can make the contracts and all the deals and move forward with the project from pretty much anywhere. And then the other end of it is the international distribution, of course, of the project once it's finished. And nowadays with the streaming companies and things like that, distribution is concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. But that's a bridge to cross as you get there. Then again, that is more about just making sure you aren't selling the same territory twice and those kinds of things.
Good.
Yeah. Again, that's another area I wanted to touch on. Let's go back to protecting the creative rights. And what, to me, a really important question that we probably should have asked a while back is, what advice would you give creators pitching a high budget film who don't yet have agency or studio connections? That is, how can we protect our ideas while still getting them seen? How do we keep a big studio from reading the script and saying, okay, thanks, we'll be in touch, and then they just go make the movie without us?
Yeah, that's a particular challenge for projects like this that are largely based on factual events, real events, because facts aren't something that can be protected under copyright law. And neither are ideas, for that matter. So the idea of a story about this particular person who did these things during a war may or may not be something you can protect the idea of. And so the mechanisms for protecting that are really, the advice is keep it secret. Don't share it with anybody, because then they can't do anything with it. But that's contrary, of course, to the stated objective of getting it seen and into the hands of folks that would finance and produce the thing. So the next best thing is to make sure you have some kind of a evidence of an understanding, evidence of an agreement. Probably not a written contract in the early stages, but if you're submitting material to people, you want to make sure they've actually agreed to see it and that they understand that it's presented to them in confidence without, with an expectation that they will, if they are interested in it, they're going to make a deal with you to purchase the material, hire you to work on the project, those kinds of things. And, sort of special magic language, always use the words in confidence or
I was going to ask,
confidential review. Yeah.
I mean, do we attach an NDA to it? And if we do, is that a risk? Like, aren't you pretentious to be thinking we need an NDA before I even look at your script?
Exactly. That is the risk, because oftentimes, let's face it, if you look at the history of books and television and movies and things, the same concepts tend to recur frequently over and over and over again.
Yes.
So
yeah.
As a executive or a studio development person or something like that, they'll be very reluctant to agree not to use the ideas embodied in your thing when those same ideas could be embodied in 6 other things that they've already got on their desk and might also just come out of thin air to them. So yes, it's a risk that you'll be perceived as, I wouldn't say pretentious, just sort of as somehow overly
valuing our own.
Yeah, not worth the trouble, a hot potato.
Right. Yeah, well, there you go.
And, but that said, there are some instances where we do use non-disclosure agreements or confidentiality clauses, but typically in that pitching phase, they're not going to sign them. And it's actually going to get you branded as a problem child.
Right out of the gate, right?
Yeah.
So it's just an unavoidable part of the business, or just an unavoidable risk at the beginning.
Yeah. So you want to lay that groundwork of there being a relationship, a confidential relationship that they would be betraying by using the material without engaging your deal.
The thing you said though about like, okay, well, you can't protect facts. Mm-hmm. The thing is, the lawyer in me is wanting to argue these facts do not exist, but for Ian's putting them together. There was no history of TJ that was out there to be discovered, except that Ian put them together.
And still,
okay.
Copyright law is designed to protect the particular expression of the ideas, not the ideas themselves.
Okay.
So
that's important.
Yeah. So once the ideas are, look, let's face it, the idea of boy meets girl and they fall in love and they're, against their family's wishes and they end up in a suicide pact. That's an idea. It's the specific way that Romeo and Juliet is told that was at one time.
Have you read the book?
Theoretically protected. No, but I saw West Side Story. Yeah. And no, I have read Romeo and Juliet, but you get my point. The point is there are multiple ways to tell the same set of facts or ideas.
Yeah.
And the goal of copyright protection and these intellectual property laws generally isn't to create a complete and total monopoly on the idea. It's to encourage and preserve the right of the creator to create and earn from their specific creations.
Okay. Going back to something Ian was asking about, our team is international. The author here is in the UK. I'm in Japan. Not that should matter a whole lot, but and we have collaborators in the US. As we develop the screenplay and build this podcast, what legal protection should we establish early on in terms of intellectual property ownership, creative contributions, and documentation between team members? I mean, Ian wrote the book, but what if I have some fantastic creative idea that gets Martin Scorsese or Steven Spielberg on board? Shouldn't I get a bigger piece of the pie at that point?
Well, maybe. Again, it's an idea. It's really the execution that's what counts. But at least that's the argument. But yeah, I mean, I think the way everybody protects themselves in these scenarios when they're collaborating or working on a project is the contract. Either the company's operating agreement or the individual engagement agreement, whether it's an employment or an independent contract or whatever, with the people, between the people and the producing entity, should address these things.
Okay.
Again, in order to get that chain of title to be what we call clean, everybody who touches the project should have in their contract language the work made for, this is U.S. law, but the work made for hire language that basically says the company owns the work. And then it's about the compensation. What's the structure of that compensation? You can build all kinds of contingencies into a contract. If you bring this, this, and this, then we'll get X, Y, and Z. And then it's a question of how do you prove who brought what?
See, I think Ian, he's suggesting that we renegotiate my part of the deal here, my contract.
I didn't hear that.
That's the way I interpret it.
Well, this is where I now have to say I am a lawyer, but I'm not either of your lawyers. I'm not any of the listeners' lawyers. So
Not
I don't
yet.
represent any of the parties.
I might have to get you on retainer. He's telling me.
Well, that's exactly what I'm thinking. I mean, this is what you do for a living, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So typically, how do are we a typical organization coming to you? What your clients look like, and how do they engage with you, and what does the end goal look like?
Well, that end goal question is the tricky one. It's all over the map. My clients run the gamut from individual creators, writers, writers and folks like that, or producers, or playwrights and composers, things like that. And sometimes it's the investors who come to me as for advice and representation. Sometimes it's the production company that is actually doing it, and I'm sort of responsible for quarterbacking that chain of title process, and then into the financing and production end of things, and documenting all the deals. I'm a transactional lawyer. I don't go to court. I'm not a litigator. So that's so I'm the deal guy. And I can help figure out structures and all those kinds of things. But it really, I'm a gun for hire. So what the client needs is what they get from me.
If a novel like ours, like Ian's, were to be optioned by a studio, what are the most critical clauses to negotiate in an option agreement?
So an option agreement is a contract where the buyer, the acquiring party, basically pays a deposit to hold the material available exclusively for them if certain conditions are met. Usually they're not going to what we call exercise the option until and unless they're pretty sure the financing is in place and they've got the cast they want, and there's a market for this product and all that. So the option agreement typically involves a smaller upfront payment as that holding fee, the option price. And then the next term you have to think about is how long is that option going to remain in effect. Typically it's a year to 18 months, and sometimes there's renewals, again, with more additional fees paid in order to hold it for a longer period. And then at some point there's a purchase price, and that has to be articulated. Sometimes that's articulated as a percentage of the budget of the project. Sometimes in television it's articulated as usually there's a purchase price and then a per episode payment for royalty payment essentially for that. So those are the kinds of terms that need to be articulated. And of course the scope of the rights that's being granted also needs to be articulated clearly. Producers want to acquire all of the rights so that there's nothing out there competing with the project, and rights holders tend to want to keep it as limited as possible, certainly holding on to things like radio teleplays and podcasting and stage rights and things like that. And then merchandise is another component of this, and is that a separate revenue stream, or is it all lumped in together with a part of the profit participation? That's another important term to consider. So it comes down to time statements and money statements.
Merchandising. I'm imagining a little Ian action figure now. That's terrific.
Nothing to do with me. Maybe
well, you're in the book. You do play a small role in the book. Well, let's say we want to retain creative control or serve as executive producers. Let's not just say it. We do. So how can we contractually preserve those roles as first-time screenwriter producers?
That's a function of your bargaining power. If you've got a hot property that folks want, they are going to be willing to work with you to deal with you on that at some level. Now, if somebody's putting up $500 million, they want to know that the people they're dealing with who are going to be in control of the project can actually deliver the deliverables, the output, on time, on budget, on schedule, and in accordance with the deal, right? So they're not going to be entirely comfortable with newcomers, first timers being in total control. So you're going to have to compromise there somewhere. But
Sure.
being consulted, being involved in the meetings, participating on set, those kinds of things, those are all negotiable terms that aren't typically given to writers. But if you bring more to the party, and here you are, Ian, you're bringing a team and a package and more than just a book, right? So I think you're in position to negotiate for some or all of that, and certainly the producing credit or executive producing credit on the project.
So it's not. This is something that's happened before. We're not trying to do something that's never been done before here.
No.
No. If they're bringing $500 million to the table, they can turn this into an anime, a porn anime, if they want. I'm in. I'm in.
That's the fun.
Well, I'm long dead by that point.
Okay, so let's now talk about the business of making a movie. The creative side that we've been talking about is obviously important, but for big films, the business structure is everything. Without it, you can't raise money, you can't protect your rights, and certainly can't deliver to a distributor. One element I think that at least Ian and I have been aware of is that thinking like a business from the start while protecting the creative is how films really get made. So here's my question. You've helped structure deals for Broadway shows, independent films. What are the key financial structures behind large-scale film projects that creators should understand, whether that's an LLC, a limited partnership? What kind of ownership and control agreements need to be in place?
Again, that's one of the lawyer's going to say it depends, right? I guess it does depend sort of on which model we're talking about. If you're dealing with a major film studio, a Paramount, Warner Brothers, Universal, right? They are going to be acquiring everything. They're going to buy everything, and then they're spending their own money to make this project. And you guys, as the producers, creators, or owners of the underlying intellectual property, are going to be contracting for your right to go along for the ride and collect fees for your roles involved in the project, and back-end royalties percentages to compensate when the thing becomes a big success. And that's about it. There really isn't much more to it than that. How much are they paying for the rights? And maybe, what rights are we holding on to or clawing back at some point? And there are clauses like reversion of rights and things like that. If they buy it and then don't do anything with it, you can sometimes get the rights back, those kinds of things. On the other hand, if you're financing it independently, that is through investors and things like that, and there are other models as well, but then, you're giving the investors a stake of ownership in this single purpose company that we've talked about. Typically, that model looks something like about half of the company being sold to the investors for their investment, from which they typically expect to get a full recoupment of their investment back first. And then once they've recouped, it would drop to a 50-50 or some percentage split between the producers. The one side is the producer's side of the pie, and the other side is the investor's side of the pie.
Yeah.
The producers from that producer side also have to pay anybody that they've promised back-end participations, those net profit or hopefully not gross receipts recipients. And maybe there's some investors who came in early with some higher risk money that we would give a little piece of gravy from that side of the pie as well. And so, the producer team probably isn't going to have a full 50% share of the proceeds. Now, we also have to talk about the fact that there is this sort of cascade, a waterfall of revenue coming from a film. I don't know how far we want to get into this, but if you start at the box office in the theater is keeping a chunk of the ticket price, usually half or so, sometimes more, as their to cover their expenses, essentially, as their fee for exhibiting the film. That money, then the remaining money goes to the distributor. The distributor takes its fees, and then it takes off all the costs of distribution, the prints, the advertising, the marketing, anything else that comes up, and then forwards the balance to the producers, who have to pay off the investors or the loans if they've used debt financing and these kinds of things. And then they have to share with the net profit participants, and then they get to keep the bits that are left.
Do people end up with bits that are left? I mean,
well, yes. I mean, let's face it. When you're talking about movies, and this is the film model that I've just described, in the film world, a movie that does well might generate $500 million at the box office, right? You're talking about spending $500 million for a TV series; it's a whole different story. But that $500 million, by the time you slice and dice it down to the thing, there's still a fairly significant number at the bottom of that equation, right? And so that's what gets divvied up among the producers. So it may not seem like a big number relative to the total box office number. It's still a big number for most individuals to take home at the end of the year as their paycheck. In television, things work a little differently, because most of the television networks and streaming companies and so on, well, they're buying the right to exhibit the film, and there is no further revenue stream. There's no box office to track. So you're typically just taking whatever amount they've agreed to pay, usually on a per episode. It's called license fee. Whatever they're paying on a per episode license fee, and that's how you fill up that recoupment bucket to pay back investors, if that's the case, and then what's left becomes the producer's share. The nice thing with television is that it is episodic, so there's a new product each month, week, whatever it is, or as you build the property, and each episode sort of pays for itself. Typically in television, we don't see investor-backed financing very much. Usually the network or the streamer is agreeing to pay a license fee when the episodes are delivered. So you give me the pilot, we'll give you this much money. You give me the episode number 1, you get another payment. Sometimes they'll advance some money so you can get up and running. But then you take that contract to the bank and you borrow the money. And assuming you deliver the show, you get paid, you pay back the loans, and then what's left is yours. The nice thing about that is that once you pay off the loan, there is no further participation at the bank level. So,
Ian, do you still at this point see this as a theatrical release? That is a release in theaters that people go or you're seeing it more as it's released on Apple Plus TV or whatever?
Yeah, absolutely. We I know this whole podcast started out as we're going to make a $50 million movie. But around about October time last year, we moved across to we are making a $50 million TV show. And
per episode, 50 million.
Not
per
season
episode.
2, right? But season 3 is going to be, we are making a $500 million TV show or whatever it is, because it's clear that the costs are. We've now got the treatment. We've literally finished the treatment, and it's much clearer how much effort is going to go into each episode, and it's so raising the finance to make this thing in the first place is going to be the biggest part of this for the moment. Getting paid back later is almost like it's the other side of the hill.
To find out more about the book, visit tjswar.com. And to buy it, click on the Amazon link below. So follow us, join us as we create TJ's War, the $50 million TV series.